I have a question for you when this is kind of part of the stuff I wanted to talk about today,
Go ahead.
because I had so many cool ideas, and not only with me rewriting chapter 8 and finishing that, I kind of need to do a couple of passes at the other flashback chapters.
Yep.
Um,
Makes sense.
so how do I want to word this? With characters, last episode we talked about motivation, right? Like what drives each character. How does, from what position does Janet operate? She operates from dominance. Zero operates from competence. The assassin operates from manipulation.
Yep.
So these are all the driving mechanics, the driving components of the characters themselves. But the characters themselves also serve as pieces of a narrative. They're building blocks. They're widgets in the machine. They're spokes on the wheel,
Yeah.
And so, and by I say purpose, I mean they serve a function to which only they can serve, and that function justifies their very existence in the story. You with me so far?
Oh yeah.
It's real navel gazy up your own belly button stuff. And let's start with Janet. What do you think her function in the story is?
Janet's function in the story, I would say, there's kind of a common thread in a lot of my detective type characters. There's a common thread with Darius, which, if we wanted to get into the weeds, was probably part of why she and him got along, because they had this sort of similar like bent to them. At least the part that made them get along, not the part that made them like not get along, which is a whole other story. Is that she can't let it go, which again, that kind of vibes with that bit about how she wants to go off and find Lieutenant Lang's killers on her own, because she just can't let she's one of those people who, like, when something happens that she doesn't like, it just nags at her until she either makes it right or somebody else makes it go away. And that's basically what happens here. She very easily could have just told Oscar to disintegrate, to vaporize the dead artificial dead Zarn, whatever, that had no ID, and they could have just made that problem vanish. But that didn't sit well with her. She wanted to get to the bottom of it, because she had to know, even if it was, possibly detrimental to her own health, what the hell is going on here? There's something going on here that's not right, and I want to know what the fuck it is. So her purpose is to basically be a ferret. She's ferreting out information, ferreting out leads until she gets to the bottom of whatever it is. Again, even if it's not necessarily good for her own mental and physical well-being, because again, kind of going back to the bit about how this vibes with her trying to go off on a one-man crusade to hunt down Draconis. She's a blunt instrument. She'll hunt after something and beat at it with a hammer, even if a scalpel is what's called for, if that makes any sense.
So I would say her purpose is the driving force of the narrative.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. That's probably a better way to put it than what I was saying.
And I'm going somewhere with all this.
No, you're fine.
But and so and she's the driving force of the narrative. She's the one that, since she can't let it go, her character trait of not being able to let it go is the fuel for the engine that keeps the narrative going, right? That her personality defect, that bit of character development, is the whole impetus for the whole story. Without that one driving, like, I can't let this shit fucking go, it just forces the story to keep going. And none of the story happens. happens without her, and none of it happens without that little bit of character development, right? What does Alyssa do that if we took Alyssa out of the story, does the story change? What is the thing that she does? What is the purpose that her character serves?
I think the purpose of Alyssa is to basically be, I can never remember what the different parts of like the kind of what consciousness are in relation to it, like id versus ego versus super ego. Don't use the Freudian terms. Janet is, or not, I'm sorry, Alyssa is basically Janet's conscience. You know, she's basically the one who sort of reins her in and says, wait a second, here's the better way to do this. She's not necessarily stopping her from chasing down those leads once she joins the group, their partnership, but right. She's one who sort of offers sanity, because again, Janet is a blunt instrument. Alyssa is, again, to go sort of back to last week's topic, where it's like, you know, what are their
restraint,
their narrative bents, their motivations. Alyssa is more cerebral. She operates from a place of thoughtfulness. She operates from a place of she would be more. I think we did actually talk about this in last week's episode. But Alyssa is more like Zero than like Janet in many ways. She comes more from a space of competency and wants to just see, okay, this is the best way to do this. Here's why. Here's how we're going to do it. We'll go do it. So she kind of offers she's like a mediator for Janet. She's kind of like the good cop and the good cop, bad cop routine.
What I would say is this, and I say this not only from the greatest position of love, but how much I believe in the Erebus effect, and how much yeah. As it stands now, you could combine Alyssa and Zero together, because they both serve the same function. They both serve that voice on her shoulder. They both serve the voice of the conscience. You could make Zero 10% more emotional, and then it serves the same function.
Yeah.
However, here's my pitch on that. Because in the last act, right before they go to the evil secret lair in Protocon, Alyssa doesn't really do anything after they get to the evil lair, right? Like, she gets captured, and then she sits in a chair, and then she gets rescued by Janet, and they leave, right? It doesn't really affect the plot past that point. The last place where she impacts the plot to where she does an action that no one else does that justifies her existence there, and the whole story, is she shoots the assassin when the assassin's about to strangle Janet.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing she does in the whole book. She has the greatest impact on the entire storyline right there. And so with that, past that, she doesn't really do anything. And I think in the fight with the assassin, she should get so injured she can't go to Protocon after that. And the whole point of her going to, because here's my pitch, I don't want to rewrite the ending. The whole point of going to Baba Yaga's is a place to put Janet to convalesce, right? Because, like I said, she doesn't really impact the plot in any significant way. And if someone doesn't impact the plot in any significant way, they have no business being a part of it. Because there's a line where the assassin says, "Oh, we'll deal with you later." It reads like us as the writers didn't know what to do with Alyssa, so we put her off in the corner. But Baba Yaga's is the perfect place to put her off in the corner, have her be so injured that She's like, no, I can still go. As like she's missing a foot or something. I don't know. That's part one of my pitch. Part two, all Baba Yaga's got to do is give her a ride. Because much like Alyssa, when Alyssa gets to Protocon, everything cool that Baba Yaga does is off screen. And all her people do things off camera, and they don't really impact the plot after that. So they don't even really need to go to the party, right? And so here's my pitch of all of this. Alyssa fights the assassin, gets the assassin to whatever, protects Janet from the assassin, is so damaged in that fight, she can't leave Baba Yaga's. Baba Yaga says, hey, I'll give you a ride and I'll protect your friend. And I kind of think we have to give some sort of like material incentive for Baba Yaga to even do anything, because old friends are great, but also to stick your neck out for someone else because they were friends with a guy you dated back in the day is a bit of a stretch. And when Baba, and all of that is to say, kill the assassin in the nightclub. Alyssa kills the assassin, right? And stick with me here, because here's where it gets spicy. Alyssa kills the assassin. The assassin beats up Alyssa so bad that she has to be dropped off at Baba Yaga's. Because then his entire purpose, and their greatest mechanical narrative purposes intersect with each other. They take each other off the board, narratively speaking, right? Yep. You have this other guy, because Janet's driving the plot and the other guy is driving the danger, right? But yep. past the nightclub, the assassin doesn't really do too much. He just kind of becomes a lackey, he's just kind of like there after the evil boss or whatever, and then he's like, you should join me and we'll be assassins together, and then she kills him. But I'm like, you cut that. And so kill him there, and here's where it gets good. You have the assassin's dead, Alyssa's off the board, they go to Protocon. She doesn't get captured in Protocon. She hops in the back of a truck in Protocon, because when she gets captured, it means she's not driving the narrative. Alyssa is nothing if the person that she is absolutely drive personified. No, Janet have her get to Protocon, have her get not captured, have her find the disc or the widget or the crystals or whatever. Then she hops in a truck to go to the bad guy's lair. So that way she's still driving her narrative. She's not captured. And while she's going off to the bad guy's lair, or maybe the bad guy's lair is underneath Protocon. So that way it's all in one place, but you could have both, because you kind of want to have the scene where Zero gets like deprogrammed. So, and I like that. That's really good. And so while she's in the back of the truck that she hopped in, Zero gets deprogrammed. So that by the time she faces the bad guy, who I think his name is Dalton. What's that? Dalton. She's all by herself. And then she's like, I'm a robot, but I'm really a person. And then she loses. The story ends with her losing, because she gets reprogrammed to be the next assassin. And then the reader thinks back to all of the rest of the book, sees how she's unhinged, sees how she just fucking kills the herons and enjoys it. There's a glee to her. She was meant to be an assassin sleeper agent the whole time. And the assassin she kills, that's her future, right? she can see that and say, oh, that's what she's going to become. And then Dalton's there, and then he's like, yeah, we let you break in because you killed my assassin, and I need a new one. Tag, you're it. And then that way, the book ends. Alyssa is damaged, but she's healing. She'll be a protagonist in the future. Janet has been converted to the dark side. That leaves the Europa goodbye to establish Darius. And in book 3, the assassin is set to kill Darius. And Alyssa's got to be like, hey, let me help you.
Let me stop you right there.
Talk to me.
Let me stop you right there. Because I don't know. Again, one of the things that I should have done for you, and again, the first thing I want to say, I want to get out of the way right now. These are wonderful ideas. This is good storytelling. This is a sort of thing that makes this like cooperative writing thing fun. So if I sound like I'm rebutting any of this, it's not because I don't agree or because I think it's bad ideas. It's because I already had my own ideas pre-established that we can probably adapt. That's the good news. Here's the story. Book 2 of the Erebus Effect triptych, or whatever you want to call it, is called the Europa Goodbye. We already know that. The Europa Goodbye is in itself part of possibly a small series of books about Darius being a detective on Europa, which is basically a corporate town. Europa is basically a world-spanning corporate town. It's run by a corporation called Interplanetary Dynamics, which is basically like the post office, which is basically like UPS for the solar system. Okay. And they're basically rich enough they can own a moon and do what they want there. It's kind of like some of these quasi dystopian or fully dystopian satires you see where it's like, oh, Zuckerberg's a king in the next 50 years or something like that, and he basically owns the moon or something like that. It's kind of like that. That's kind of what IPD is. But the third book in this canon of Janet's story, Darius' story, so on and so forth, is called Tracers. And Tracers is about a character named Moira Halleck. Moira Halleck is how to describe Moira Halleck? She is also a veteran of the Draconis Crisis, and she's basically a bruiser. She's basically a heavy. She's basically a person who, she's sent in to quiet down trouble areas and kill people who are causing trouble. She's basically, if Janet had even less tact. And what she is in this story is a tracer. Tracer is kind of like a bounty hunter. It's basically another term for bounty hunter. A tracer is like a state-sanctioned bounty hunter. I know bounty hunters are technically state-sanctioned anyway, but she's basically a bounty hunter who works for the ICA government to hunt down criminals and either bring them to justice or eliminate them. And this is kind of an idea I got from things like Firefly. Again, you have these bounty hunters, Firefly, who are meant to, or not Firefly, but also Cowboy Bebop. The way they manage the rampant criminal underworld of the Cowboy Bebop universe, which is in many ways similar to the Spacer Saga universe, is they have bounty hunters who get paid rewards to hunt down criminals and eliminate them. That's basically what Moira does. She's an ex-soldier, she's a badass, and she's a tracer. And she gets tasked with, like, her latest trace is hunting down missing ALCA agents Janet Harkov and Alyssa Yukawa, who've been missing for 20 years. And the ICA wants to find out where they went because they think they might have some information about the Zarn Collective. The Zarn Collective obviously was formed after the Zarns had an uprising, only a few years after the events of the Erebus Effect. And so it's in a way it's sort of similar to Blade Runner 2049. It's sort of how, you know, Ryan Gosling's character is another Blade Runner who gets tasked with who not maybe doesn't get tasked with, but decides to hunt down the original Blade Runner and find out what happened in the original movie. And that's kind of what happens with Moira. And for that to happen, Janet and Alyssa get away at the end of, at least in the current lore, the current version, which again we can workshop however much we want, which that's the beauty of it, since nothing's published yet. Nothing's published yet, so it's not set in stone. But my current idea is that Alyssa and Janet and Alyssa get away at the end of the Erebus Effect, and Darius helps them sort of escape into the frontier, like the outskirts of the solar system. They basically like hiding out on Pluto or something like that. Like this, basically as far from the rest of civilization as you can get. And that's where Moira hunts them down and then finds out what their secret is. And the secret is, oh well, I haven't worked that far ahead yet, because that's that's several books ahead of where I am right now. I haven't written the second book yet. I haven't even finished writing the first draft of the second book, let alone started drafting the third book. But the secret is something to do with like, oh, the Zarns have this network of spies all throughout human space. That's how they were able to pull off the uprising. Like this is sort of suspected, but basically the secret they have is this network, this list of names of people who were Zarn infiltrators, because not all of them were found. So the ICA wants this list so they can try and weed out these infiltrators. But the Zarns and Alliance are also looking for this list because they know that it could help them with their operations. So it kind of becomes a big shit show, so to speak. But with that said, maybe what could happen at the end of the Erebus Effect is Janet's about to be, transformed, whatever you want to call it, into the next generation of the assassin program or something like that. And then Alyssa shows up to save her. I don't know. This is something that we're going to need to work on, because I don't necessarily want to throw out the future stories, but I don't necessarily want to just discount what you've suggested out of hand, because it's cool stuff, but I just don't know how to incorporate it. That's the problem.
Well, two things here. I think 20 years you have enough time to play with, because what I pitched, and again, you're the final approving authority for the Spacer Saga.
Mm-hmm.
And my whole goal is to just make it as best as it can be. So I don't know if, so at the end of the Erebus Effect, the robots, if you have the Zaharan plot win at the end and Janet loses, I don't know if that affects within 20 years you can have that book where you could say they deprogrammed Janet or something. But
maybe they didn't deprogram her fully. Like maybe in the third book there's like it's kind of like shit, I don't know how many Call of Duty games you've played in your life, but it's kind of like, how sometimes when people are programmed, like brainwashed, some of the brainwashing leaks out even after they've been deprogrammed, so to speak. Like it's kind of like in the Marvel movies, how Bucky can still be triggered somewhat by the old brainwashing even after he's not brainwashed supposedly anymore.
So like if this one's talking about 20 years later, there's still enough room for you could revisit Janet 10 years on as the assassin.
Mm-hmm.
And then, Alyssa and Darius are trying to get her out or something.
Yep.
Because I ran this by my wife, and I used the term oh yeah, we're writing a book, we're about a space cop, right? I just called, I said space cop because that gives a broad enough of a brush that, she could understand without me going into super details. And I pitched her my ending.
Yeah.
And then she's like, well, I don't know if I like it because the space cop loses, but I'll remember it. It's different. I didn't see it coming. And I'm like, I don't think people would. I think I don't think people would see it coming. I don't, and I think that it's open-ended enough. It's the beginning of something to where we can revisit the characters on book 3 or in the series of short stories or something. To 20 years is a long time to deprogram her, to put her and Alyssa out on the frontier. In my version, Alyssa still survives, and because I kept reading the book, the draft that we have, and I'm like, oh, if she ends up as the assassin, when the whole book she's like, I need to be better, I'm trying to, I feel like I don't have control, and then you realize, oh, of course you don't feel like you do, because you're not meant to. You're a long gestating prototype for an assassin.
So it's kind of like, you've read 1984, I'm sure, at some point. So you know how the book 1984 strikes, it begins with the phrase, it was a bright cold day in April and all the clocks were striking 13. The kind of ending you're envisioning for the Airbus effect is all this, like, the clock struck 12, all was well, or something like, Janet was right where she needed to be, all was well, or something like that.
And she fulfilled her ultimate purpose, which was to be the next assassin. So
maybe what we could do, and this is again just me throwing out an idea, we could add a chapter on at the end where it's like we sort of extend this story, so it's like maybe like an epilogue almost. So where it's like Janet is the assassin now, and Alyssa shows up on Europa, and she's like, hey, and it's like, hey, Derek, it's like, hey, Detective Maroney.
Yes.
I've got a mission for you.
Yes. And
then the next book is pitching us Darius. Maybe we can even stretch this into 4 books. Why the fuck not? More books are always better. Maybe the third book could be bringing Janet back, and then the fourth is like, bringing Janet back over the course of like the mid 2050s or late 2050s during the Zarin Uprising. Maybe the Zarin Uprising is ongoing because it starts in 2357, goes all the way through the end of the Draconis Crisis in 2361. So it's like the whole system's in a fucking shit show, because the Zarin Uprising, if I haven't ever told you this, my idea for the Zarin Uprising, a big part of it basically came from the Android Uprising in Picard season 1.
Yes.
So that's basically what happens with Zarn. It's like Zarns all over the solar system rise up and decide, hey, we're gonna have a revolution now.
Because if you end it with this, if you end the Erebus effect with this, just firebrand, fucking like she's a ruthless killing machine, right? Like and if you end it with her, and she is just the bluntest of instruments, the most forceful protagonist, losing.
I just had a brilliant, go ahead, keep going. I just had a wonderful idea how this ties into future stories too.
Then it will show the reader just how dire the overwhelming situation is. It'll give, because when we talk about the Zaharan Uprising and several books later, we'll say, oh, we saw where that began. But what do you got?
Yeah, the thing I was going to say is talking about how Janet is like this basically this born killer who would make a perfect assassin. When we meet her again after the time jump, 15-year time jump or whatever it is in 2374, I think would be that, which is the 20 years after the Erebus effect. And the ICA is looking for Janet, looking for Alyssa, looking for these people, and they send Moira after them. Moira's a little bit younger than Janet and Alyssa. She's like 8 years younger than Janet, which I guess would be 6 years younger than Alyssa. I've obviously got all their birth years and stuff plotted out because I'm a completionist when it comes to my lore. But Janet is like 8 years older than Moira Halleck. So she would make like a great elder sibling type / elder cousin role, and she might be able to help Moira come into a little bit more of her own as a person, because Moira is basically the same as Janet is. Like I said a little bit ago, she's a blunt instrument who basically is sent after problems and told, make that go away. So Janet can basically pull her aside, sort of like that. This is like the fulfillment of Janet's character arc. It's basically her being able to pull Moira aside as they're like busting Zarn heads and Alliance heads and everything else, and say, "Hey, kid, here's the thing. You may think you know how the world works, but you don't. You need to understand there's more to life than just bashing problems flat with a hammer. You need to find something that you care about again, because, again, part of the reason that Moira is the way she is she was injured during the Zarn Uprising, and her sister was killed. She and her sister both were like orphans from Titan, and they were adopted by the ICA, and they were raised to be soldiers. And the thing about Moira is that she basically has a condition where she doesn't feel fear. So she makes like a perfect soldier. It makes her kind of an interesting character. But she's like, I don't give a shit about your family and all that stuff. But it's obviously deep down everyone does. Even people who claim they don't, they need something. Everyone needs something, and if they haven't found it yet, they need to find it. And that's what Janet can tell Moira is you need to find something to care about and dedicate yourself to it. And that sort of sets Moira on this path towards where she is 15 years later in the Frontier Wars, where she ends up becoming sort of like a sort of helper for characters like Matt, Devin, and Sam, the three main characters that I've told you about who you haven't met yet. Right. She ends up becoming sort of like a contact for them during the war against the Alliance and Zarns.
Okay, so but if I'm reading this correctly, book 1, you like my pitch?
Yes, I like it. I wasn't sure at first, but I like it now that we've workshopped it a little bit, because now we've found out how to incorporate it into the lore, which is now we're thinking of like adding maybe an epilogue to the Erebus Effect, maybe adding a third or rather a fourth technically book to this canon. Now we're cooking with gas, as you like to say.
Yes. I apologize if my language might have been too blunt earlier.
When I was
just like, she serves no purpose past this point. It's just how my brain works.
No, I get it.
It's kind of a cold, I look at narrative like cold and dispassionately. So end of book 1, Janet loses. And then it kind of shows where the Zahar, you're laying the seeds for the Zahar Uprising. Because a couple books later, the Zahar Uprising will happen. Right, like book 3, where Alyssa and Darius are trying to like save Janet, or Janet is like this evil spy. Maybe Janet's after them. I don't know. And so you kind of have this mirror of the assassin after Janet in the first book, but then you've got Janet, who is now the assassin after Darius and Alyssa,
but they're like trying to rescue her. So if anything, here's my crazy thought number X out of however many.
Sure.
The Erebus Effect is sort of a spiritual sequel / prequel to the Europa Goodbye. God, I'm mixing up the names.
You good?
The Europa Goodbye is sort of a spiritual sequel / prequel to the Erebus Effect, but it's actually more of a standalone, because it's sort of spinning off its own offshoot, which is about Darius' adventures on Europa.
Yeah.
The second book in the Erebus Effect triptych is the one where Darius and Alyssa rescue Janet, and then Darius helps Janet and Alyssa flee to Pluto or something. And then the third book is where Moira hunts them down, and it's sort of bringing everything full circle.
Because in the second book, where they're rescuing Janet also, and if I remember this correctly from your lore, that's when all hell is breaking loose with the Zaharan Uprising.
Yes. And it's Zarn. I know... Yeah. No, you're fine. I know.
If I'm a part of the universe, I should know how to say the words correctly.
I get you. No, I've noticed that I don't like correcting people like that I'm good friends with, because it's like rude. But
you can correct me when I'm wrong. That's okay.
Well, it's the Z. The H is basically silent. The Zarn basically it's just it's basically pronounced. It's basically pronounced Zaran. Yes.
Got it.
I didn't want to spell it that way, because I don't know how the spelling for Zarn came about, but Zarns are one of the first things that actually one of the oldest things in the Spacer Saga universe. I remember I still lived on the northwest side of Indy when I came up with them, so that would have been at least 2007 at the latest. So probably 2006 or 2005. So we're looking at like a friggin' like 16 or 17-year-old bit of lore at least.
Yeah, never worry about correcting me on the if I'm wrong with lore, if I'm wrong with pronunciation. I'm on your team. We're a team on this, and so it is my responsibility to, at the very least, say the words right. That's like being an actor on Star Trek and be like, oh, when did the Jedi get here?
Oh Lord.
Like, you're way off, dude. But okay. I'm glad you like my pitch, because oh fuck, I loved it so much when I thought of it. I'm like, I really hope I can sell this to him. And
I do like it. I'll admit I was a little bit I don't know how to describe it quite, because it's definitely not like I felt like, I think that you remember the way I responded when you were trying to change things back, like 3 or 4 years ago.
You didn't
But
look at me
we've
like
come so far from there, because now, I mean, I sort of rebelled a little bit when you pitched this new ending, but then I was willing to work with it. And as we talked about it more, I was like, ooh, yeah, this is something I can work. This is something I can make happen. Because I see the value. Because again, I've worked with you long enough now, and not just that I've worked with you long enough now, I know you better now to know that your ideas have merit. They obviously have merit. I wouldn't work with you if they didn't. This probably wouldn't work if your ideas didn't have a place in my lore. And I was like, I'm gonna run with this. Let's see what he has to say. And sure enough, the more we talked about it, the more I got on board.
It's killing some darlings.
Yes.
It's definitely killing some darlings.
And it takes it in an interesting direction, because the way I have it now, even I can admit, it's kind of generic. It's kind of like, oh, well, they basically literally ride off into the sunset, Yeah. It's kind of like they kill the assassin together and they ride off into the sunset. So what? The way we have now sort of spun it together, it's basically the good guy loses, but the good guy's best friend goes to track down her ex-husband, and they decide, and basically it's left kind of like, the only friggin' example I can think of is actually from Red versus Blue. There's a bit in one of the later seasons of Red versus Blue that you probably would have never seen, where they've spent the whole season showing flashbacks from this project where like the freelancers were trained. And at the end of the season, they bring Church back and put him in a body. And it's like, why the hell did you do that? I was happy. I was dead. And then Carolina, one of the freelancers there, it's like, hey, Church, hey, Alpha, you're going to help me kill the director. And this is like the guy they've been basically showing as the leader of the Project Freelancer and all these flashbacks. That's the only example I can think of. It's not really a good example because you don't know the references, and most of our audience probably won't either. But that's kind of the gist of what I'm going for. Is like basically the way it ends. The last chapter in the book ends with Janet like going under as they're like reprogramming, and she's like rebelling and fighting, and then it like cuts out, and then there's like a white space, and then it's basically like maybe it's like half a page, or maybe a page, maybe less than a page, maybe less than half a page of Janet in her new role being like, she was out on the hunt, she got a new assignment, everything was how it was meant to be. Because she's now accepted the way she is, because obviously she has no choice, she's been programmed. And then the epilogue is on Europa, and we have Darius in his precinct, just sort of going through the motions, doing his daily routine, and someone's like, hey Maroni, there's some chick here to see you. And he's like, who the hell could this be? And he goes out and it's Alyssa Yukon's like, who are you? Who the fuck are you? And she's like, hey, I think we have a mutual friend. I bet you're gonna help me. You're gonna help me find your ex-wife, and we're gonna reprogram her.
Yes. And then the next book after that is the Europa Goodbye, which kind of establishes the Darius character and gives all of the backstory for Darius. And then after that, you pick up from book 1, and by book 4, it's 20 years later, and then Alyssa and Janet are off in the cosmos doing their thing. I think this really works. And if you want, I can do, because I haven't written this yet. I wanted to talk to you about this because, again, you can always say no to things. You don't have to say yes to everything I say. Because I think this works the best when one of us is the final authority on creative, and like you're the final authority on the creative stuff, I'm the final authority on the business stuff. And if we want to do a thing, we got to pitch it to each other.
Yep.
You know. So that way we both feel like we have a specific ownership of a component of it, but also we have say in the other component. We have our voices.
We have a middle ground.
Yeah, there's a middle ground. We're both open up to talking about it. That's really cool. I will write a draft of this ending for you if you like.
Your thing. Well, because that's the beauty of it is, you know, we're so used to pitching things back and forth anyway in terms of doing like revisions. So even if there's like things that I want to end up changing about the ending or like rewording, we can always do that. That's the beauty of it. Like I said, this isn't a published book. This isn't like a blog post that I'm editing on the fly after it's been published. This is a book that hasn't been published yet. So this is the part where we make it nice so that when it does get published, it will be the best it can be.
And I because, you know, and forgive me if I'm not subtle or I don't know, man. It's like sometimes I just say words and I'm just like a bull in a china shop. And I try not to be because I care so much about you and I don't want to be an ass. Like
funnily enough, bulls in china shops apparently are not all that destructive. I don't know if you ever watched that Mythbusters episode. They made like a fake china shop, like with real china on fake shelves. They let a bull in there and it like avoided everything.
There you
go. It's weird. But anyway, that's my random shtick of the day.
So, like you said, it's a bit generic, the ending where they literally ride off into the sunset. And I kept thinking, if I'm reading this, what's the thing that I wouldn't see coming that would stick with me that I would fucking love? Because if I would think about it for days after, oh, she loses. And I'm like, oh, how to make it lose? And okay, I'll write that. And that's exciting. I'm really glad that you're a book. I could convince you on this. I was like, okay, think this out, have it logics, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was hoping to maybe talk a little bit about your glowing review of chapter 17, I think it is, the one where it was basically the start and end of Darius and Janet's relationship.
Yes, it was really good. It was.
I was hoping you'd like that.
Oh, it was a thing of fucking beauty. And you know, not to hang too bright a lantern on it, you haven't been in a relationship like that yourself.
I've never been in a relationship.
Yeah. And to write about one without having the experience of one that competently is impressive. Like, seriously. Like, I've been in, like some relationships are just destructive and toxic and just, you hate yourself, you hate the other person, you hate everyone around you because nothing's the way it should be. And you show, like, I had almost no notes on that. Like, I there was a couple lines I trimmed, right? There's a couple sentences where they're like, if a sentence had 7 words, I could take out 3 and make the sentence work still, right? That's it. There's a few of those. But, like, the mechanics of it, the mechanics of the relationship on a first time fucking, like, pass, like, it's no notes, man. It's beautiful. It works. It's believable. It's authentic.
The main thing I wanted to capture in that chapter when I envisioned it, because I pretty much envisioned it as being a 2-part chapter right from the get-go. Like the first half is their like first meeting, literally. They're like convalescing together in a military hospital after they've both been injured on Titan. near the end of the war. And they're like, and Darius is being Darius. He's like a smooth talker, and they're both kind of drugged up. And it kind of, you probably noticed this, where it's like his touches on a couple times on how she's like, is this just the pain medication talking, or is he actually really interesting? And it's like they hit it off because they have things in common. They're both kind of like type A personalities. They hit it off. The end of the second half of the chapter is the end of their relationship, basically their last time together. They are on their way to this. I actually talked with my mom about how her relationship with my dad ended, and part of the reason I set the ending of their relationship in December of 2346, at least I think that's where it is set now, is because that's December of 1996 is the year is when my mom and dad's marriage technically ended, when they actually officially divorced. And so Janet and Darius have been married for about 4 years by this point. They basically got married when they got home from Titan, after sort of dating while they were in the hospital and dating during their end of their deployment, having a brief courtship period. And then they got divorced. They separated for a while after Janet got hurt on Ganymede. Because, again, for the sake of our listeners who haven't yet read this story and have none of the lore probably yet, aside from things they may have heard in other episodes, Janet, Darius wanted to start a family. He always wanted to start a family. He's like, I'm done with the military. I saw all I need to see. I'm traumatized. I'm fucked up, and I know it. And I want to put that part of my life behind me and maybe start a family. Janet was fucked up too, but she also wanted to go career. Again, obviously this is something that you added to this story, which I think is really, obviously beautiful really isn't the right term, but very touching, which is the idea they had a miscarriage. They tried to start a family and it didn't work. It blew up in their faces. And that's part of what made Janet go back on active duty, and she went to Ganymede as a peacekeeper and got badly hurt, which is actually when she gets replaced as a Zaran. They take her consciousness and put her in a Zaran body, because apparently I think the lore is that she actually wasn't supposed to make it, and the corporation stepped in to help her and actually replaced her with a Zaran infiltrator, and it had her memories, had her consciousness, all of these things. And then after they separated for a little while, they ended up divorcing in December of 2346. And the second half of this chapter, to go back to the original topic of what we're talking about, the second half of this chapter basically is them on the tram in Aldern City on Mars, or whatever city I ended up setting it in. I can't remember if it was Aldern City or not, but they're on their way to basically the courthouse to sign the paper to say, hey, we're no longer married. And it's basically just Darius again, sort of being the smooth talker, except in this case, he's saying, hey, do you have any plans? Do you know what you're going to do now that you don't have a place, or don't have a place to live, or whatever? And he mentions, oh, I think I'm going to go to Europa and get away from all this. And she's like, well, I'm going to stay. By that point, she's already doing the start of the ALCA Academy, basically federal academy, whatever you want to call it. Sort of the academy it's basically like Quantico for FBI agents.
Yeah.
And she says, I'm going to stick with that and see where it takes me, or something along those lines. And that's basically how it goes. And they just they don't really know what to say to each other, because it's how do you talk to someone who you still remember loving, but you can't remember being in love with, if that makes any sense.
That hits, man. That hits real accurate. That's really good.
And again, like you said, I have no experience with this, so all of my knowledge of this is all gained secondhand.
Well, kind of what I like about your writing is you're such a fucking sponge of everything, of information, of lore, of different concepts and ideas and stuff. And you're an information sponge. And so you're pretty good at taking different concepts, ideas, love, relationships, the military, space. And even though you've never experienced some of these things firsthand, you're a gifted enough writer to make it believable, And what's really cool is you talked about lore earlier, like, oh, lore in real life. That's just life experience. And you're getting a taste of that now off in the world.
Yep.
And which is really cool. And what I'm really excited for, right? And I'm excited to work on all of these things, but what I'm anticipating too is, you know, I don't know if you know this, most of all of the characters I create are army medics, because I'm not super inventive, right? I'm like, oh, I'm writing myself at different points in my life. Tommy Sampson and Winston Carmichael are just me at different points in the timeline. That's it. But you write characters that aren't you, right? Like, for the first 30 years of your life, all of your life experience was I hope this doesn't sound bad, was in your imagination, creating the Spacer Saga, fueled by other inputs. The normal experience is fueled by inputs throughout the world, interactions with people and situations, organizations, whatever. All of yours were generated by Stargate, by The Expanse, by Star Trek, by Isaac Asimov, by Robert Heinlein, by the great writers of science fiction. And so you're actually able to generate realistic characters based on experiences you didn't have. I can't do that. Not really. I can generate characters. Well, they're like adjacent to experiences I had, right? Like, I could see a character, someone I kind of knew, and I'm like, oh, I could probably do that a little bit. But
I think you hit on a really good point there, and it's that it's even for experience. If it's based on experiences you don't have, it's all extrapolation.
Yeah.
It's all adjacency. It's all adjacency principle. It's all taking this and moving it one step to the left or right or whatever, and moving it one step more, so on and so forth. All the characters I've ever made, no matter how much they may be based on me or not, and many of them have shades of me in them, which we've talked about on here, I think. They're all based on people, you know. I name them after people. Oftentimes, I like steal names from people that I know in real life or people I've heard about in real life, and I base parts of them on people that I've known, because, you know, even people that I've not known. Like, a lot of it comes from, again, like you said, movies and TV. Like watching movies and TV and reading books, you know, listening to other podcasts, listening to books on tape. I take the traits from these characters that I've absorbed and I regurgitate them in new forms. You just take this raw material and you use it as clay to make things on the pottery wheel, so to speak.
Yeah, and this isn't to say you haven't experienced life, but you spent the first 30 years living at home, going to school, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And now you're out in the world, you're working in NASA, you're rubbing elbows with the most brilliant people in the planet. But before that, you wrote about a bloodthirsty space cop. Like, you know, a female space cop at that. And so you have this feminine character with a lot of masculine traits, or traditionally masculine traits to them, that's doing a job that you've never had in a place you've never been, in a situation you've never really been a part of, and it's really impressive. Like, I don't do stuff like that. I wrote a character in I wrote a series called Agent Z and the Zombie Slayers. It's a middle-aged veteran dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. Wasn't much of a stress. Now, I don't have PTSD from a war or anything. I have my own fun sadness from different life events. But still, I wrote the first episode at the height of the pandemic in like December of 2020, right? When things were real sad. So it was me working that out. But like, you know, he's a middle-aged veteran and all of his friends are dead and he feels all alone. And I'm like, yeah. But
yeah, well, I mean, again,
your characters aren't a one-for-one analog for you, and I really think that's impressive.
Well, I think another thing you touched on when you were giving me nice compliments about chapter 17, you said something like that I'm more attuned to emotion than I give myself credit for. And I think the thing that really belies is that as an autistic person, maybe as the specific type of autistic person that I am. I mean, obviously other people experience autism and express autism in various different ways than I do. But the way it expresses for me is that I have to focus on emotion. The downside to that is it makes emotional expression and basically being a regular human taxing. Makes it, that's part of why I'm introverted. That's part of why I'm so shy around people that I don't know very well, usually, because it takes extra energy to put on that show. I basically am acting every day. The upside to that, however, is that it means that I have to absorb that everything I know I've had to learn. And that makes me a very good student of human behavior, because I've had to observe and absorb everything that I know about humans secondhand, basically by like being a Richard Attenborough. Here we see the wild, teenage students in their natural habitat. Watch as they cavort and gossip amongst one another. That sort of crap. I had to do that my entire life, and doing that long enough, you get really good at approximating those sorts of behaviors. It's basically doing like the Steve Buscemi bit from, I want to say SNL, where he's like, "How do you do, fellow kids?" It's basically that, but all the time.
I get that, and I'm glad that you're able to kind of be yourself with me, and like I can tell you're not like acting or anything, and you're never rude, but and what was okay? So another thing I want to touch on was I think I challenged you, I guess, to do a thing. And I say challenge and like you should do this with this thing, and when I said that when they get to Baba Yaga's, I think I pitched Darius Moroni's brother being there as sort of like the emotional crux of the chapter, of like the reason why it's there, like what purpose does this chapter serve being here, and you didn't do that, which is totally cool. Again, you're the final proving authority of the Spacer Saga. If you don't want Janet to be an assassin, she's not an assassin, flat out. But in that chapter, you have this scene between her and Alyssa, and they're talking. I don't remember exactly what they said, but it's this really kind of like quiet, intimate scene of two people talking, and that wasn't there when I sent you the response, was it?
I don't know, because I know I think
that was you. I think you wrote that.
Probably, I'd have to look at it, and again, even then, I probably wouldn't remember, because I know for a fact the idea that Janet and Alyssa are close, there's a
like they thought about dating once or twice.
Yeah, like that's kind of the implication that you probably picked that up a couple of times in the story. It's like they thought about being close, but they didn't really know if they wanted to. Janet wasn't really sure if she wanted to try that again. Alyssa is just a little bit too closed up anyway, and that sort of thing. But the way the story is written now, by the end of the story, they're basically like, hey, we like each other's all we've got. There's that bit in the current version before we've done the edits that you've suggested that I want to run with. I'm basically 99.9% sure I want to run with.
I'll get you a draft, and then you can see what I have on paper.
And we can run from there, because like I said, I'm gonna run with it. I just I always like to keep my options open. You know how I am.
It's a risk.
What?
It's a risk, but that's kind of why I like it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the way the story is written, the way the story was originally written, by the end of it, Janet and Alyssa are basically, they're best friends, and they're basically on the way to being closer than friends. Because again, they're all they've got. There's a bit in there where it's like they embraced when after Alyssa shoots the assassin, and like there's a lot more unspoken in that embrace, or something, how the fuck I phrased it. Basically, we can put that in the scene where Alyssa is convalescing at Baba Yaga's, and she's saying like, hey, if we're gonna go do this, please be careful. I want you to come back. And that then, of course, leaves things open for why Alyssa is wanting to go rescue her, because she's not just her best friend. She's like, and say, hey, I understand that you may not be ready to try to trust again, but I'm ready when you are, that sort of thing.
Exactly.
Along those lines. So it's kind of like she's saying, hey, so that's why, again, in the epilogue, she's like, hey, Moroni, let's go find your ex-wife so I can get my girlfriend back, or something like that, basically, in as many words.
I like that. Have it say that. Like, let's go find your ex-wife so I can get my girlfriend back. There's a lot of complexity in that sentence. That's good. That's really good. I like that. And yeah, it seemed like two people that were close, that seemed like they might date, but they weren't sure, but they were just like close, like there was an affection there, and but there's also like an assassin and a plot and a whole lot of other shit going on. So sometimes you're like, hey, maybe we should stop the robot uprising before we decide if we want to go on a date or not.
Yeah.
Which is fair, I think. Yeah.
I mean, part of and again, this is getting into the weeds of like further storytelling that I haven't even planned out, let alone written yet. But part of the idea in having the third book be like Moira going to look for Alyssa and Janet is that Alyssa basically get a happy ending. It basically gets right off into the sunset. In that sense, is that when Moira tracks down Darius, and then Darius ends up taking Moira to them, because he realizes this could actually help things, not, might actually help some people. Because by the time Moira goes to hunt them down, the Frontier Wars are on. So it's like 15 years after the Zaran Uprising, and the system is even further in the shit. And they realize that by getting a hold of this list of who the Zaran infiltrators are, they might be able to do some good. Because of that, when they finally track down Janet and Alyssa, they're basically living as an old sort of, unmarried best friends couple on Pluto. And again, there's the joke I was going to say is that there's a thing I read where it's like there's a post from some social media that was shared on Instagram, and it was like, my dad just discovered that his unmarried aunt, at the apartment his unmarried aunt has lived in for 20 years with her best friend, it has only one bedroom, and he's very surprised, and he says, where's Irene sleep? On the couch? She's too old for that. She's 83.
That's funny.
Yeah, something like that.
That's funny. We kind of like, they're clearly married, but it's subtle, I guess. I get that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like this. I like your plan for this. I'm streamlining a lot of what I do. Yep. I had other sort of podcast projects I had with other friends, and I realized, I'm overextending myself, so I kind of pulled back. And I'm focusing on this with you. I want to focus on getting the book out. The reason why I made sure to make this big grand pitch to you, especially today on the podcast, is because, for one, it's a great episode, right? This is going to be an episode titled something like, what purpose does your character serve, or something, yep, as that slowly becomes a how to write podcast. But also, like, what I said to you was going to be like my final draft that I do. And then what you send back to me, that's it.
Yep.
I'm kind of thinking maybe we send the first chapter. Maybe my wife reads the first chapter. Maybe a few other people read the first chapter. But, I mean, then we get it prepped for publication. And off the top of my head, I'm thinking the first Monday in January.
That sounds good. And that'd be perfect, because that's January is the start of 2024, which will be about the 20th anniversary of me making the Spacer Saga.
I love it.
So our big year starting to publish things and like in our big year of starting to publish things in for real will be 20 years of doing it. 20 years of me doing it. So it'll be kind of a nice milestone.
I love it. That's really good. And that doesn't take anything away from what we did a couple of years ago with Space
for sure.
One, but that was more of a it's a proof of concept, like you said.
Yeah, it's like we said. It's more like testing the waters. It's
yeah. And we weren't ready to work on this level. This was sort of the partnership I envisioned back then, but we both weren't there. Yeah. And
I don't know. I didn't really have anything envisioned. I was just kind of like, hey, this seems cool. So I'm probably in a better place to meet you halfway anyway.
There you go. And I am always grateful for how open you are to sharing your imaginary toys. And I hope you see any sort of criticism or critique. I speak in blunt action verbs, right?
No, you're fine, dude. We were talking about that the other day. Obviously, you talk. That's how military folks talk. It's how you're taught to talk. But having
so many arguments for people, I don't know how to. I'm not the guy who's like. I'm just like, hey, these are words that I'm thinking. There's not. You'll never wonder what I think, right? You'll always know where I stand. And any sort of action verbs I use to work on the Spacer Saga is only because I believe in it so fucking much. And I believe in you, and I believe in what we're doing.
Yep.
But with that, I think we can wrap up there, and we'll talk a little bit after. For the Blanket Fortress of Solitude, I am Derwin.
I am Nick.
And we will see you next Monday morning at 0700.
Hello, stranger. Do you like to read?
Read? What's happening? Am I dead?
I bet you like zombie books.
I like food. Do you have food?
You don't need food at dividedbyzerobooks.com. It's full of nutrient-rich science fiction.
Ugh, I'm stuck in an ad, aren't I?
Once I stop talking, reality will collapse until someone plays this ad again. This isn't the first time we've had this discussion, and it won't be the last. Hello, stranger. Do you like to read?
No, today I finished the rewrite of Chapter 8 for the Erebus Effect.
Mm-hmm.
And I took a lot of the paragraphs you already had, and I kind of took the ideas that you want to get across, where this kid is just like, no, like,
let's go bust some heads.
Yeah, but I made her a private first class instead of a corporal, because
Space first class.
Sure, whatever an E3 is in the Space Report, because the idea where you're at a forward operating base and then someone you really like gets killed, and then you're like, oh, I'm going to put on my gear and go find that person, kill them, and then you're gonna go off by yourself and do it. It's such a profoundly stupid idea that it would be an E3 idea, right? Someone who's been in long enough and has done a few patrols to kind of have an idea of how like a mission works, and then they're like, oh, I can do this whole mission on my own. And then but what I have is, I wrote the character from Veterans of the Veteran War, Tommy Sampson, as the NCOIC of the Battalion Aid Station on FOB Nighthawk, right, mm-hmm. over in the Titan. And I took all of your descriptions of it. I took your description of people, putting on the breathing apparatus and the helmets or whatever.
Yep.
And he just you know, he's just desperately trying to stay awake, and he's so tired. And then he's looking out the atmosphere window, and then he sees a lone spacer in a full combat load with a 3-day rucksack just walking toward the main gate. And he kind of cocks his head to the right, and then he's like, "Hey there, hard charger, where are you going?" He says it over the mic, and all he gets is a middle finger in response. He goes over there, and he's like, he says, "Hey, Harkoff, go to the aid station now," and then kind of talks her through, she's grieving, and she's just, it's like if you have somebody that's just old enough to really fuck up their life, and he says, "Hey, if you do this, if you leave this aid station before your NCO comes here to get you, you will be arrested by the military police. You will be busted down to E1, and you will be incarcerated for 6 months. Or you can stay here. We can talk until your boss gets here, and then we can pretend this didn't happen." Because he gets that she fucking is grieving,
Yeah, she's the type of person who the way she grieves isn't to like bawl her eyes out in the corner. She's the type of person who grieves by like punching walls. In a way,
bawling your eyes out is a healthier way of doing it.
Yeah,
but it's
in a manner of speaking, yes. But that's not how Janet Harkov is wired. The reason she joined the Spacer Corps is because she's not the type of like, well, you could say woman, but just not the type of person to like, just cry and suffer cry and suffer personally. She's the kind of person who's like, I want to go out there and bust some heads, like I said a minute ago.
But yes, but the way that this, but you get where this, the way I'm rewriting this,
right? Oh yeah, no, I totally agree. I'm not refuting what you're saying. I'm backing up what you're saying by saying that's why Janet is doing what she's doing.
Sorry.
It's why she's like, I like the like dimension you're adding to this, because you're adding the again, sort of like you did with Winston in the Europa Goodbye, and or as we're doing with Winston in the Europa Goodbye, you're adding the seasoned NCO's perspective to this, where it's like, again, to paraphrase what you said, because I have a terrible memory and I can't remember exactly how you worded it already, because it's like 2 minutes ago. It's, hey, we're going to talk about this, and then we're going to just sort of, go on down the road. Whereas, if you were to go outside the wire and try and go hunt down the Draconists who killed the lieutenant, you're either going to get killed outright, or you're going to get captured, you're going to get your head cut off or bashed in or something along those lines.
When he's talking to her, and he's like, he's serving two masters here, right? Or two purposes here.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's saying, hey, you need to stay here until basically, it's kind of like if a small child like wandered off, you'd say to that kid, hey, you need to stay here until your daddy comes to pick you up. All right. Like if there's a 5-year-old errant, like little kid somewhere. But
because like I think if I remember the timetable of this part of the story, sorry to interrupt. I'm just throwing out some detail from like the world building perspective. At this point in the story, Janet's probably 21 or 22. And
I think you're at 20. Yeah,
because I'm pretty sure in like the main body of the story, the part that's like set where she and Alyssa are, hunting down or trying to chase leads in this the Erebus conspiracy, basically, is set in 2354. And I'm pretty sure the flashbacks are set 15 years before that, which is 2339. And she's like 36 or 37, I want to say, in 2354. So she'd be like 22, because the Spacer Corps is a little bit different. And this is something that I probably should have told you ages ago, so I apologize. But a little bit of lore about the Spacer Corps. You can join at 18, but most people join at 19, because the Spacer Corps again, for the sake of our listeners and for you, Derwin, who's now part of this world building, situation, the general age of admittance for Spacer Corps, instead of being 18 like it is in like the U.S. military, for example, like the age of adulthood is when you turn 10 in Martian years, and a Martian year is about 1.88 Earth years. So you're about 19 when you matriculate into into boot camp, basically. And boot camp, I know that it lasts longer in real life even than most people think, because there's boot camp and then there's AIT and other things that you actually do before you can be a regular soldier. But in the Spacer Corps, it takes at least a year, because they not only have to teach you how to be a soldier, they have to teach you how to use your EVA suit. They have to teach you how to do EVA emergency maneuvers, because again, you're going to be traveling in space. So they're basically teaching you to not just be a soldier, but how to be an astronaut too. And they give you a crash course of that over the course of about a year, maybe a year and a half. So you go in when you're 18 or 19, you come out when you're about 20 or 21. And then that's a Spacer First Class, which is an E2, to use the military terminology. So Janet is either an E2 or an E3, which I think is a senior spacer. Sort of like senior airman in the Air Force or whatever. So yeah, she's not she's not green. She's not super young, but she's also still pretty young. So she's kind of in that sweet spot where it's like you said, she's basically a small child of the military.
In the military, has just enough experience to get herself and probably several other people killed on her behalf.
Yeah. Because this is her first, the first couple months of her deployment on Titan.
So here's what I have, Tommy's response to her.
Mm-hmm.
She says, oh, you don't really give a shit that he's dead, do you? Intel indicates that the missiles were fired from a valley about 20 clicks out. If we can just triangulate their lost position, we can track down and get them down and get justice for Lieutenant Ling. Private First Class Janet Harkoff said, scowling at the staff sergeant. How dare he even presume to contradict her, let alone tell her no? Never mind Tommy was on the evac team that flew in to grab Pepper. Never mind the note Pepper handed Tommy on the bird that was meant for Pepper's father. Never meant the hours that they spent working on Pepper the night before, the blood on Tommy's hands that he couldn't quite seem to wash off. No, this ignorant child with as much time and service as Tommy Socks was going to explain the nature of war and the responsibilities of NCOs. Tommy took a deep breath and said, "This is your first deployment, right?" he asked, trying to keep his professionalism and not lose his shit. But yeah, so that's I was trying to think, how would I respond? I would just kind of just sit there and just count to 10,
basically. Because I like also there's just sort of to touch on some other stuff that you've added in, some other flavoring you've added into other bits of the flashbacks in the Erebus Effect, which is what we're going to be calling it, I guess, now that we're trying to basically start what's the word, publicizing the actual name, which is
formerly known as Shadow Play.
Yeah, no longer known as Shadow Play. It's Spacers, the Erebus Effect. But there's a bit in I think the next flashback chapter that takes place on Titan where Janet, which is set in 2342, at least in my timeline. It might have changed once or twice. It might have changed a couple of times since you saw it first, but it's the end, basically the end of the war, basically the end of the Titan War. The first Titan War lasts from 2335 to 2342, which is the end of the first Draconis crisis. Again, for the sake of argument, and that's when the Alliance sort of takes over and says, "Hey, we'll take it from here. You pull out, and whatever." So that by 2342, Janet has been on Titan for 3 years, and I like there's that bit in that chapter. It says, "But after 3 years, she no longer cared what happened to the locals." Or however, I think I might have edited it. So because I think you said local nationals, I think I might have taken that with the nationals out just for the sake of clipping the sentence down so that it stay on 2 lines or something so the paragraph would stay on 2 lines because I'm weird like that. But
both versions work.
Yeah, it shows how even in the course of 3 years, because this is 3 years of war. It's not like 3 years. Because it's the sort of rule I have for spacers in this setting is that advance a lot closer to the way people advance like in World War II than the way people
Yeah.
advance, say, in today's military. Because in today's military, even if you're deployed like 5 or 6 times in Iraq or Afghanistan or both, it might take you, it'll still take you a certain number of years to bump up the ranks, even as an enlisted person, as an officer, or whatever. You watch. I mean, again, I know this is fiction. It's a fictionalized account, but it's a fictionalized account of reality. You watch Band of Brothers; those guys who started off as like, low ranking enlisted, like when they first dropped into Normandy, by the end of the series, they're like master sergeants or sergeants major or whatever the case may be. They've got three chevrons and 3 rockers, or however many it is. There's some of the guys. I may be misremembering this, but a lot of them, like they went up through this. They went up pretty quick because
I'm not disagreeing because I don't really. I've never actually seen Band of Brothers, which is something I've been meaning to see for 20 years now.
You need to wait and watch that when I can watch it with you.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, I'm not disagreeing with that because I haven't seen it, so I don't really know the context. I do know I saw a guy in Iraq who was a supply sergeant. Okay, he ran a supply office as a corporal, as an E4, and then 12 months later we left Iraq, and he was an E6. And that's the fastest. That's probably the closest thing I saw to a battlefield promotion there, because he was shit hot with the commander's property book, and he made damn sure that her property book reflected that she didn't lose any items downrange and did not have to spend a dime on lost equipment. But yeah, so the quick promotion happens. Yeah, I don't know, from E3 to E8 real fast.
Yeah, I don't know if it was that much, maybe, because I know now that I think about it, the guys who were like E8, or maybe not E8s, but like high-ranking sergeants. Again, forgive my ignorance in the workings of the military. But the guys who were high-ranking sergeants by the end of the war, they were already NCOs by the time they dropped into Normandy. I think they were probably like E4s or E5s.
But that would make sense if you were an E2 and got, if you dropped a Normandy. Again, I was in this army 80 years after what we're talking about, so I could be wrong here. From my memory, from my perspective, drop it in Normandy Beach, going from like an E2 to an E5 or 6. Well, by the time you get to Berlin, couldn't make sense. You go from E5 to E8 by the time you get to Berlin, could make sense. It, going up 2, 3, 4 2 or 3 ranks from Normandy Beach to Berlin, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Again, I haven't seen Band of Brothers, and this was 7 years before my time, so I could be completely wrong here, and I never want to be like, I know everything for all time with the military. I don't. I can tell you, I can really tell you how the global war on terror went. Like, outside of that, I'm kind of, guessing.
I get you. I'm really good at lore within like my own specific wheelhouse, which is mostly fictional stuff.
Sure.
Mostly stuff I've made up over the years.
Mm-hmm.
You have the addition of having some lore from the real world, which again is part of why I originally brought these stories to you. If I remember correctly, when I originally reached out to you back in like 2016 or something, or maybe it was a couple years after that, but I originally reached out to you because I knew you were publishing books, and I was like, even if he doesn't want to do anything with it, because I don't think I expected this is sort of like getting into some like personal history between the two of us. I don't even think I expected you to do anything with it. I was just hoping you'd look at it and like give me some pointers on like how to make it better. When you like called me up one day, or like I think while you were having one of your Monon walks, and you were like, "Hey, I'd like to maybe publish this." I was like, "Do I have to pay you or something?"
Oh God, no. Like I I never, of course, I never made any money. So, there is a double-edged sword there. But I was always a big believer back in the day, in the previous incarnation of Divided by Zero books, of it's my job to generate revenue as a publisher. And the customer should be the people that buy the book, not the author.
Yeah.
The author is more of a business partner, but I should not be making my money off the author, because if I do, well, I'm just, excuse me, I saw so many people would take people for a ride. They would say, "Oh, you've got $1,500. That's all the money you have in the world. Come use my Kindle Direct publishing account, and and basically do all of the shit that you could do for free with like 6 months of research on your own." They would charge them,
Yep.
and it would be this terrible thing. And I would look at them and be like, "What do you should not pay sometimes thousands of dollars to me to do a version of the thing you can do for free. And I cannot guarantee you success. I can guarantee you a finished product, but I can't guarantee you financial success. You know this because Spacers Volume 1, the first iteration, the proto version of what we're doing, was not what you call rapid fire success."
Yeah.
I think the most money you made off that story was when I bought the rights off you.
Yeah. I mean, everybody's got to have their first run out of the gate.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. We have I wouldn't even really, I would definitely call it a success in that we have a good finished product there with Spacers Volume 1.
Yeah.
It's more, so I don't want to say it's the failed first attempt, but it's kind of
It's like a proof of concept.
Proof of concept. That's a good one. And like an early draft of the Spacers Saga.
Yeah, I mean, it's not set in the right time technically for its part of the lore. The lore isn't accurate, like there's faster than light travel and stuff, but it's a good proof of concept because it basically says, hey, you could a complete novice to the Spacers Saga could crack open the Spacers Volume 1 and look at it, and they would find seeds of things that have been in the Spacers Saga since before Spacers were published and are still in there. Things like the ICA, things like the war, at least involving Mars, all these different things, the artificials, stuff like that. There's lots of stuff that still holds true today.